Welcome to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani, on Facebook at the Facebook page of our content partner Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. Also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there, where you can watch us live. So it's Monday morning, 10 a.m., another show, and today's show I'm super excited about. We have, as our guest today, someone whose work has profoundly influenced my life, even in the short period of time that I have been studying his work and appreciating it. Dr. Jordan Peterson is on the show as our guest today, and we've got a 90-minute interview. So we're going to be able to get into a bunch of great stuff. Also, just as some opening news, we have some things about Trump, the deep state. We'll see how much of that we can get into before we bring on Dr. Peterson. And to help me out with all of this, as always, my good friend, producer, and co-host, Mr. Christian Reyes. Christian, good morning.
Thank you, Vin. Good morning.
Well, you know I'm excited for today.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible.
Right?
I can't wait.
Super excited. This is my number one dream interview since we started this. So you know that I'm very excited about having Dr. Peterson on. And you know, it's funny. So when I have told people have been like, wow, he has influenced so many people. I think, I turned you on to some of his lectures.
Yeah.
He's known, of course, for, or how he came to sort of public prominence was he getting into this controversy about the gender pronouns, about the non-binary people and people who want to be called by preferred pronouns. And there's a law that's passing in Canada that's basically making it hate speech almost to not call somebody by their preferred pronouns, but meaning instead of he and she, that there are new words like je and jur and all these made up things. And if you don't call somebody by that, you can actually be prosecuted under hate crime laws in Canada. So he stepped out and he did a few videos saying that he was upset about it. It caught fire. Yeah. And obviously, there's a lot of people out there who are not big fans of social justice warriors, and the social justice warriors are not big fans of Dr. Peterson. But I think that they don't understand the depth of what his study has been for decades now and what his objections were. I don't know if we'll get into that whole thing today. That's been covered a lot. What I'm hoping that we get into more is, as I found him and then as I started listening to his work, he has some very, very profound insights on everything from politics to personality to mythology to religion in this very coherent framework that is powerful. I mean, when you start to understand it, the whole world changes. Right. So I'm super looking forward to that. Oh, I don't want to forget, dude. Shirts. Keep calm and avoid taxation. Go to how many do we got?
We have a winner also.
Oh, we have a winner?
Yeah, we do.
Have we stopped the contest?
No, but we have a winner from
last week.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a contest winner. If you go to vinarmani.com and sign up, we're going to pick a winner every week for a shirt. We have women's shirts. That's like a racerback tank, and then we have these men's shirts. Keep calm and avoid taxation. Who is the winner for this week?
Let me grab it real quick.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so these shirts are made right here by the one and only Mr. Christian Reyes here in our print shop. You want to just fight? Is it there?
His name's Aaron.
Okay, well, Aaron,
we'll be
there,
emailing him.
We'll email you. So you're the winner. So go to vinarmani.com. Go ahead and sign up. Give us your email, and we're going to pick a winner every week. You'll get a Keep Calm and Avoid Taxation shirt. And I guess we're going to make different designs as time goes on. Okay, so I'll leave that on. I'll leave that on you. So, dude, of course, we may as well start with Trump, right? That's where it seems like things always go in the news nowadays.
Especially now.
And oh man, it's been quite the week. The media's not too happy with him. Let's go to this first news story and see just exactly what's going on.
Sit down.
Just because of the attack of fake news and attacking our network, I just want to ask you, sir.
I'm changing it from fake news, though.
Doesn't that undermine?
Very fake news.
I know, but aren't you?
They do not know how to take him. So he's triggered everybody. Now he's triggering the media, calling out the failing New York Times, CNN, I think ABC, NBC. But you know the old saying that you don't pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel, and he's definitely doing that. The media is not happy with him, and they have succeeded already in undermining him. We're going to see how this battle goes on. It's a little tit for tat, but already his National Security Advisor, General Flynn, has resigned. And resigned because of some recorded phone calls that he had made. It's very, very confusing. Reuters did a little piece. There's still more coming out on this. Just to give a little bit of background on this Flynn thing and the recordings, Christian, why don't you give us this Flynn video?
The New York Times reporting that U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign aides were in contact with Russian intelligence officers in the run-up to the 2016 election, citing four U.S. officials on Tuesday that point to phone records and intercepted calls. They say U.S. intelligence uncovered them while looking for evidence of Russian hacking into the Democratic National Committee. The Times sources admit so far there's no evidence the Trump campaign actually colluded with the Russians on the hacking or anything else. However, officials say the intercepts set off alarm bells as they happened when Trump spoke favorably about Russian President Vladimir Putin last year. That includes a campaign event where he said he hoped Russian intelligence had stolen Hillary Clinton's emails and would publish them. The Times also reporting Paul Manafort, who ran Trump's campaign for a time, was one of the advisors picked up on the calls. He worked as a political consultant in Russia and Ukraine. He has not been charged with any crimes. Manafort told the Times on Tuesday he's never knowingly spoken to Russian intelligence. These calls are different from the wiretapped talks that led to National Security Advisor Michael Flynn stepping down on Monday.
Missile
Trump's
launches
office
also
said Flynn
in
misled
defiance
the White
of UN
House about his
Security Council
contacts with
Resolution
Russia and asked for his
2231.
resignation. The Times report came as
Senators
U.S. lawmakers
voting
on
in the
both sides
negative.
call for a wider look, not only at
Baldwin,
Flynn, but at broader
Bennett,
White House ties to
Blumenthal,
Russia.
and in what could be the
So they are still working this Russian narrative, man. It's really, really a trip. That press conference that we had shown before, that small, very fake news clip, within that, Donald Trump is still saying, you know what, if we could get along with Russia, that would be a very good thing. If we could get along with Russia, that would be a very good thing. And it would be a very good thing. I think that's pretty clear. But one thing you have to remember is the media likes war. They have a vested interest in war. Their ratings go through the roof when there's war. So there's almost a conflict of interest in their reporting when they're reporting on somebody who's talking about that they don't want war, because that's where the media's bread and butter is. If it bleeds, it leads. I mean, this is the core of where journalism is at this point. And it's interesting because this is the angle that they're going. This is the narrative that they're following. I don't know what exactly they're trying to do. Let's look at this Hill thing. So this story actually was changed, the headline. Now it says, for Trump and Russia, the fall of Michael Flynn is only the beginning. What it initially was, the headline, pretty inflammatory. It says, the original headline was, how Russia talks may ultimately bring down Trump. So those in the media, particularly in the Beltway media, are really talking about, let's bring down Trump. So far, no high crimes and misdemeanors. That's what it takes to be impeached. I think that this is a dangerous place that we're going. But from this story, from The Hill, the most important under-investigated story of the presidential campaign could ultimately become the greatest political scandal in U.S. history. How the Trump administration may have conspired with top Russian intelligence officials and perhaps Vladimir Putin himself to interfere in the election, get Donald Trump elected president, and undermine U.S. foreign policy. As revelations about these Russian contacts slowly leak out, some legal scholars are beginning to suggest that Trump campaign officials might have broken the law or even committed treason. That sounds like partisan hyperbole, but it may eventually become an inescapable legal conclusion that Democrats and Republicans alike will need to face. Consider what we now know. According to the New York Times, phone records and intercepted calls show that senior members of the Trump campaign, his transition team, and his associates were in regular contact with Russian intelligence officials throughout 2016. So what we have here is we have this very strange, now the media is all about the leaks. Now they're all about that. When they were defending Hillary Clinton, leaks are bad. Remember WikiLeaks? It's the little CNN piece where the anchor was talking about it's actually illegal for you to look at WikiLeaks. But these are intercepted calls. Intercepted calls. So obviously this is coming from the NSA, and it's not WikiLeaks leaking things. It's the government, the U.S. government, leaking things to the media to try to undermine the president. Now, whether you like Trump or not, this is new. Like, I can't remember, or I don't know historically of a time when functionaries within high levels, powerful levels of the government have been actively trying to undermine the president out in the open on this level and this early. I mean, he's been there for a month. And speaking of being in for just a month, the New York Times, just to tell you where this whole thing, where the media is at, man, Trump has really pissed them off. He's triggered them to the point where we've got these types of things like coming from the New York Times. Let's get this New York Times article up here. Headline, how can we get rid of Trump? That's the headline. From the New York Times, we're just a month into the Trump presidency, and already so many are wondering, how can we end it? One poll from Public Policy Polling found that as many Americans, 46%, favor impeachment of Donald Trump as oppose it. Ladbrokes, the betting website, offers even odds that Trump will resign or leave office through impeachment before his term ends. Skybet, another site, is taking wagers on whether Trump will be out of office by July. There have been more than 1,000 references to Watergate in the news media in the last week, according to the Nexus archival site, with even some conservatives calling for Trump's resignation or warning that he could be pushed out. Dan Rather, the former CBS News anchor who covered Watergate, says that Trump's Russia scandal isn't now at the level of Watergate, but could become at least as big. And so when Trump says the failing New York Times and fake news, and then they come out with this thing that says 46% of Americans favor impeachment. Like, not just dislike him, but favor impeachment. I don't know where they're getting these, but there are some really strange polls out there. The first of these polls I just want to show some discrepancies, like on polls that are done the same day. Now, you remember the Huffington Post poll that was 98% Hillary Clinton is going to be the president of the United States, 98%. And remember how many of those. So these polls are unreliable, clearly, but they keep going back to these pollsters. Let's see, do you have Trump's approval ratings here, this approval ratings? So this is from NBC News. This is the Gallup 1 month approval rating, showing that, or trying to illustrate that Trump's approval rating is lower than almost every other president in their first month. You have this NBC Gallup graphic. So you can see here presidential job approval ratings after 1 month, and their statement, Trump has a historically low approval rating after his first month. You see that overall he has a 40% approval rating, they say. Obama had a 64, Bush the second had a 62%, Clinton 51%, George Herbert Walker Bush 63%, Reagan 55, Carter 71, Kennedy 72. You see really where Trump is getting trounced is only 8% of Democrats, it says, and 35% of Republicans view him, his job approval ratings as if they approve of his job. But Rasmussen, same day, they're doing their daily presidential poll. So this is after 1 month. Listen, we have this Rasmussen graphic here, Christian. The image. So they've got it at 55%. that at one point, 26 January, that he was almost at 60%. So there's a huge discrepancy between 55 and 40 Christian. Like, that's a giant swing. And the dangerous part about this whole why don't you go ahead and flip us over? There we go. The dangerous part, I think, about this is I'm trying to understand more and more what it is that they're trying to set up. Mm-hmm. Like, impeachment is not just some little thing. I mean, that's essentially subverting the will of the people in their vote. Now, as a voluntarist, I'm against voting, but by the same token, I am against voting on the basis of principle. So if you believe that voting is a valid means, your principle has to be that you don't just eliminate the results of that vote on a whim just because you don't like the way that it turned out. Mm-hmm. Like, impeachment cannot become a normal part of the political process, because it basically just defeats the entire political process.
Yep.
If we're really talking, and they're talking about impeachment for what?
Right.
It's for high crimes and misdemeanors. So far, I haven't seen a high crime and misdemeanor. Mm-mm. And as I understand it, the high crime and misdemeanor, if I understand it correctly, the high crime and misdemeanor has to take place while the person is in office. So it would have to take place after the vote had been made. Because you can be elected to office even if you're a felon. You can still be elected to office. There's nothing prevent you might not be able to vote as a felon, but you can still hold office. That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Right? So the high crimes and misdemeanors have to take place when the person is in office. Mm-hmm. He's been in office for a month. Nobody's even suggesting high crimes and that there's been a high crime and misdemeanor. They're front loading the impeachment idea.
Right. Yep. I've seen a couple stories surfacing recently about impeachment, and
this is crazy.
It's just a triggering all over again. They're just so.
Well, the question though is, if it's going to come, where's it going to come from? Because the other thing that I've been seeing a lot of, particularly in the liberty movement, is this notion of the deep state. Yeah. And so while we have this next few minutes, I wanted to dig into that before we bring on Dr. Peterson. But that's our second story, the deep state. Now, here's the thing that I want to say about the deep state. What is the deep state? It's very simply this idea that while you elect officials, it's very self-evident. We elect officials, but overall, that's like the icing on the state. The deep state is the cake, the immoral, corrupt, nasty, rotten cake underneath that fluffy pink icing that is the elections. And in there is the bureaucracy, right? The people who have worked for the government for decades, right? Who don't leave when things change in D.C. They're not attached to an elected official. They're the people who work at the EPA and the people who work at the Department of Homeland Security. They're your TSA agents. They're your FBI agents. They're your CIA agents. The people in the middle to the middle top tier. But why are we calling this the deep state? That's the actual state. That's the state. Like, that's, if the state is the cake, that's the state. You know, just because you can choose what you write on top, it's like Donald Trump president, Hillary Clinton president. It doesn't change the fucking cake. The cake's gonna be there. And it's the people inside the cake that are trying to throw the icing off because they don't like it. And this is a dangerous situation. And what we have is we've got people now coming out, interestingly enough, people who I haven't seen hide nor hair from in the last 8 years, but who, as a member of sort of the anti-war movement and certainly the anti-war protest movement in the past, I recognize these people. One in particular was Dennis Kucinich, and I wasn't the only person that noticed that, because Aaron Dykes over at True Stream Media did a great little piece. I just want to play a clip from it because I think he put it together better than I could. Let's play this True Stream.
General Flynn has admitted misleading the vice president, but I think we have to look at this a little bit deeper. A phone call from the incoming Director of National Security was intercepted, and the contents given to the media. Now, what's at the core of this is an effort by some in the intelligence community to upend any positive relationship between the U.S. and Russia.
Former Congressman Dennis Kucinich has come out of hiding. He's been quiet through almost the entire Obama administration. Used to be a very vocal critic during the war on terrorism, in the wake of 9/11 during the Bush years, and now that Trump's back in, he's saying things that are just never have been said publicly before on TV.
There are people trying to separate the U.S. and Russia so that this military-industrial intel axis can cash in. The American people have to know that there's a game going on inside the intelligence community where there are those who want to separate the U.S. from Russia in a way that would reignite the Cold War. That's what's at the bottom of all this. It's like, it's early in the morning, it's Valentine's Day, but wake up, America.
Warning the American people that the intelligence community, the shadow government, the apparatus is trying to undermine the Trump administration.
Hey, look, what's going on in the intelligence community with this new president is unprecedented. They're making every effort to upend him.
And part of this is, do we really have elections or not? Do we really elect a president, or is the intelligence community and the deep establishment and the banking interest and the bloodline families, are they really the ones who are in charge no matter what?
We need to make sure the White House is communicating clearly to the American people about what's going on, but the question is the president getting the right information, and are there games being played inside the intelligence community to force American policy in a direction that's different than what the White House wants? We need to have closer ties with Russia. We can't be suckers in this, but we cannot also have certain people playing an agenda that separates us from our aspirations for peace between the two major powers in the world.
So Kucinich went on TV to point out that the entire bringing down of General Flynn, while he admitted to wrongdoing, was set up because it was leaked from inside the system, specifically from high levels of inside the intelligence apparatus.
Inside our intelligence community.
There's definitely something going on inside the intelligence community to try to undermine this administration. This isn't about whether you're for or against Donald Trump.
Right.
Hello? Mm-hmm. This is about whether or not the American people are bystanders in a power play inside the intelligence community, the outcome of which could determine our relationships with Russia and whether or not billions of dollars are going to be spent in a new Cold War. Whether you're for Trump or against Trump, the White House is under attack from elements inside the intelligence community which are trying to elevate tensions between Russia and the United States, and at the bottom of that is money, is an agenda for somebody to cash in on conflict between the U.S. and Russia at any level.
CIA, NSA, the 17 intelligence agencies, the contractors, they intercepted his conversations and deliberately leaked it to the media to set Mike Flynn up. And why? What's at the heart of the issue? Well, he's talking with the Russian diplomat about making relations between our countries friendly again, dropping sanctions, and not building up to war. And that's exactly what the intelligence community and the deep establishment and the deep state do not want. Now, we haven't seen what Trump is going to do in the years to come. This may be how they twist his arm. Maybe he was down for this agenda the whole time. Regardless, irrespective of Trump and his agenda, this is yet another blatant display of the shadow government reasserting its power and putting its foot down and saying, no, we will undo your lieutenants and your top cabinet people, and we will take out your version of national security because we control intelligence and we control this country. That's the message. Now, whether Trump is playing his part so that the American people at large can witness this message in a pageant form.
Today's secret word is
deep state.
Now, you all remember what to do whenever anyone says a secret word, right? Scream! Right!
This is like deep state. This is like some kind of a spy novel. But it's real, and the American people have to understand a game is being played with the security of our country.
So interestingly enough, this in a lot of ways makes me worried that war is on the horizon, because Kucinich he has been a prophet, and he very much was a prophet during the Bush administration about what the war would cost, what would happen, that it would be a dismal failure, and that we would still be there. And here he is back. And what's interesting is, on the other side of this, gunning for war, gunning to be sort of the figurehead politically of that other opposition side, is good old insane in the brain John McCain, who was in Munich. And do we have this little McCain article here? So as the Washington Post basically heroically trumpeted that he went to a Munich security conference, gave a speech specifically directed at Donald Trump. We're going to play a little clip of that. I want you to just pay attention to the phrasing that he has there. And then I'm going to play another clip of him on Meet the Press. And I think it's very telling what is on the horizon and who he is seeking to represent. Let's play this Munich video first.
What would von Kleist's generation say if they saw our world today? I fear that much about it would be all too familiar for them, and they would be alarmed by it. They would be alarmed by an increasing turn away from universal values and toward old ties of blood and race and sectarianism. They would be alarmed by the hardening resentment we see towards immigrants and refugees and minority groups, especially Muslims. They would be alarmed by the growing inability and even unwillingness to separate truth from lies. They would be alarmed that more and more of our fellow citizens seem to be flirting with authoritarianism and romanticizing it as our moral equivalent. But what would alarm them most, I think, is a sense that many of our peoples, including in my own country, are giving up on the West, that they see it as a bad deal that we may be better off without, and that while Western nations still have the power to maintain our world order, it's unclear whether we have the will.
So he's talking about our world order. Sounds a little like New World Order. Just to freak out you conspiracy theorists a little bit more, let's play John McCain the next day on Meet the Press, just to see which world order he happens to be talking about.
I'm curious of your reaction to a tweet that the president sent Friday night. The fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, CBS, CNN, is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people. You believe the press is the enemy? Do you believe any group of Americans are the enemy of another group of Americans?
I was talking about the period, as you know, of the New World Order. A fundamental part of that New World Order was a free press. I hate the press. I hate you especially. But the fact is, we need you. We need a free press. We must have it. It's vital. If you want to preserve, I'm very serious now, if you want to preserve democracy as we know it, you have to have a free and many times adversarial press. And without it, I'm afraid that we would lose so much of our individual liberties over time. That's how dictators get started.
That's how dictators get started, with tweets like that?
No, they get started by suppressing a free press. In other words, in consolidation of power, when you look at history, the first thing that dictators do is shut down the press. And I'm not saying that President Trump is trying to be a dictator. I'm just saying we need to learn the lessons of history.
Senator McCain, I'm going to leave it there. You are a student of history, that's for sure. I always appreciate you sharing your views, no matter how much you hate me. But that's all right.
Thanks, Chuck.
Senator McCain, thank you.
So, Senator John McCain, the CIA, the NSA, the deep state and the mainstream media working hard to preserve the New World Order from the attack that they feel Donald Trump is leveling by trying to have good relations with Russia. Just something to think about. We've got Dr. Jordan Peterson coming up, so we are going to go to break and then put him on. Come back. I can't wait for this interview. I'm very excited. But before we do, when you think about who's lining up on what side, and you got John McCain in there, let's not forget this little picture. We got this ISIS picture, and we'll leave you with this. There's Senator John McCain in Syria. When you think about who wants war and who's in support of war and death and destruction. Over his right shoulder, our left, that guy sort of standing in the background looking sideways in the black shirt. Yeah, that's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That is the head of ISIS in a meeting with John McCain. Like Kucinich said, they're all trying to cash in on war. And war is the health of the state. It's the health of the deep state, too. So keep that in mind as this keeps going. Again, it's not about whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump. This is a lot deeper than that. So, we're going to go to break. We will be back with Dr. Jordan Peterson. So, Christian, it's that time of year again.
It's getting cold, man.
It is getting cold. It is getting cold. But you know where it's not getting cold?
Acapulco?
That's right. And you know where we're going to be in February?
Acapulco?
Yep. Last week of February, Acapulco. I'm speaking down there this year.
It's going to be
So I know you're looking forward to seeing me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to broadcasting. We're going to do some interviews. Who are you interested in seeing down there?
Of course, Jeff Berwick.
Well, yeah, it's his conference, obviously.
Larkin Rose.
One of my favorite anarchists.
Adam Kokesh.
Well, Adam's always fun.
Yeah, we saw him here. Lauren Southern.
Hot. also brilliant. So I'm interested in seeing her.
Luke Rukowski.
Yeah, from We Are Change, of course.
And Roger Ver.
The Bitcoin Jesus.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
That should be awesome. Well, and don't leave out some friends of the show, like Activist Post contributor Derek Brose. He's going to be down there.
Great, yeah.
And Backwards is going to be performing. They're like the headlining
I can't wait
act.
for that.
Very cool, anarchist, kind of rap punk. Very, very cool. I haven't seen them yet, but I'm interested. And, you can't go wrong. Acapulco, 5-star hotel, Mundo Imperial. It's going to be super amazing. Drinks, sun, I'll be by the pool for sure. So, it's actually rented out the entire spot just for Acapulco.
That's incredible.
Well, it is the biggest anarchist conference in the world. Right? So 5-star hotel, Mundo Imperial in Acapulco.
Can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong, man. And if anybody wants to join us, and I hope that they do come and join us, go and visit anarchapulco.com. And when you buy your tickets, use the coupon code Armani, just like Vin Armani. Use the coupon code Armani, and they're going to get 10% off their tickets, Christian.
Save 10%. Can't go wrong.
Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there. And of course, we are streaming live on Facebook, on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. So without further ado, I would like to bring on our guest for our show today, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Hello.
Hey, Vin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Jordan Peterson is a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, a clinical psychologist, an essayist, lecturer, and author of Maps of Meaning. He studies two main areas: the psychology of belief, including religion, mythology, and political ideology, and the assessment and improvement of personality, including the prediction of creativity and academic and industrial performance. Dr. Peterson is presently elaborating upon the ideas in his book Maps of Meaning, communicating them to a wide public audience, and has developed an online system to aid people in understanding and improving their characters. And you can check that out at selfauthoring.com. Dr. Peterson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be.
Thank you. I have been very excited to have you on. Actually, in terms of interviews, this was my number one when I started the show, 5 months ago. Your work has influenced me quite a bit, even in the short time that I've been aware of it. In the past 10 years, there have been basically three people who have really shifted my mind, you being one of them, Alan Watts being one of them, and Joseph Campbell. So I think there's kind of that mix right there, and it all kind of draws back to Jung. And the crazy thing that when I talk to people about the material, that you go deeper, I think, than anyone. And of course, you've got all this sort of background on it, but when I talk to people, it's amazing. You start to see the world in such a different way, and you get these weird, almost like occult powers of prediction and persuasion, just because you start to see the motion of how things move. And I'm glad that we're doing 90 minutes, because the material that you have to bring to bear is obviously can't be covered in 90 minutes, and I would advise anyone to go and check out your lectures on YouTube, which will absolutely change people's lives. But what I was hoping for today, and I'll front load these questions so that I don't interrupt. I was hoping today that what we could cover, because I think it's very poignant for our audience in particular, is to come to an understanding. I think there are a lot of people who are very worried, and I think that they feel that totalitarianism may be on the horizon. I think some people on one side think it's from the left, if we want to call it that. Others think it's coming from the right. I'm hoping that maybe you could help us to understand both where the dichotomy is. It seems like it's no longer really this left-right paradigm. I think that especially lately you've had some amazing insights into what it is who these two forces are that are truly battling. And if you could help us to understand how a totalitarian regime or totalitarian thinking actually comes about, how it's birthed out of these two sides of the spectrum, and sort of what it is that we're looking at, what you see, what your prediction is, or what your warning is for the space that we're in right now, to help us understand where we are now, what are the two opposing sides, and what is it potentially that we're facing?
Well, I usually think of things backwards. So it's easy for people to assume that the fundamental normal state of a political system is something like freedom and free speech and democracy and all the things that we take for granted, but nothing could be farther from the truth. The normal state of human affairs is totalitarianism or chaos, and it takes a tremendous amount of effort for people to stay in between those two extremes. So the attraction to totalitarianism is that you don't have to think, everything's done for you, and you have a formula that you can apply to everything in the world. And then the attraction to nihilism, which would be the opposite, is that you can do whatever you want. Nothing has any meaning, but you don't have any responsibility. And so it's very easy for human societies to slide into one of those two extremes. And then totalitarianism itself can come about for different political reasons. And I think what we're seeing right now is quite a rapid polarization of viewpoints. And I think a lot of that is a consequence of, I think it's too much pushing on the left at the moment. It could easily be the other way around, but at the moment it's not. Mm-hmm. Too much emphasis on group identity and not enough emphasis on individual responsibility. That's how it looks to me.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I've been addressing certainly on this show and talking with people about, is this idea of the collective versus the individual, and the sort of collectivism that Orwell warned about. You've certainly addressed this with the controversy, and I think how most people were introduced to you was the gender pronouns controversy, which it seems to me to be a very collectivist idea. These nebulous, fictional, just sort of invented concepts seem to be the nucleus around which sort of collectivism swirls. Can you help us to understand why certain people are drawn to collectivism, why certain people are drawn to individualism? Is it something in our personalities that's innate? Is it something that can be changed? I mean, are you sort of born a collectivist? Are you born an individualist? Or is it something that can shift over time?
That's a good question. I mean, we could start by thinking about the pronoun issue, I suppose. I had very specific reasons for objecting to the requirement that I utilize certain verbal appellations, let's say. And the reason that I was objecting was because it wasn't exactly clear to me what the bill was about, this bill in Canada that has been stalled in the Senate, by the way. It hasn't passed yet, that would legislate mandatory use of these descriptive pronouns to specify someone's gender identity. I had a lot of problems with it, partly because I thought the legislation that surrounds the bill was incoherent, even according to its own principles, and partly because the language that was required I regard as part of the vanguard of a postmodernist ethic. And I hate to use descriptive terms like that because it isn't easy for people to understand, but the postmodernists are very much dead set against the central ideas of Western civilization. The founder of postmodernism, or its head joker, its head trickster, Jacques Derrida, called Western society phallogocentric, and he liked to make up words, and he was actually pretty good at it. And a phallogocentric culture, as far as he was concerned, was male-dominated. That's the phallo part, phallus. And logocentric meant predicated on logos. And logos has a variety of meanings, one of which is logic, the other of which is the divine word. In the Christian tradition, logos is the word that makes order out of chaos and is also embodied in the figure of Christ. And there's a deep idea there, and the idea is that logical, coherent, truthful communication makes order out of chaos. And you can think about that as the founding principle of Western society. And it's not only Western society that is founded on that principle, but it's most explicitly Western society. And when I looked at the legislation and the mess of policies that surrounded it, what I saw was an attack predicated on this idea of anti-phallogocentrism. It isn't about protecting trans people. I don't believe that for a second. And in fact, I haven't had a single letter from a trans person attacking my position, and I've had 20 write and support me, saying that these trans activists don't speak for them at all. And why we assumed to begin with that they did is beyond me, because now it seems to be the case that if you're the member of a hypothetically oppressed group, you immediately can claim the right to speak on behalf of that entire group, which is a mind-boggling proposition. You could hardly imagine a more, prejudicial attitude to assume that, one trans person speaks for all of them, or one black woman speaks for all black women, or something like that. It's such an absurd doctrine, but it's certainly one that everyone has accepted. This battle, so to me, what's happening at the university is a battle between postmodernism and Western, and the fundamental tenets of Western civilization, fundamentally. And the postmodernists want to tear it down right to the bedrock. And this isn't some imagining on my part. This is the central thesis of postmodernism, and it's nested inside a kind of radical Marxism, which gives it a lot of its political energy. Because one of the problems with postmodernism is that you're almost doomed to be nihilistic if you're a postmodernist. But if you're nihilistic, you can't do anything. So you need an alternative creed to fuel your motivation. And so Marxism lurks behind postmodernism. And this is something Jacques Derrida said openly. I'm not inventing any of this. All you have to do is read these people, and they tell you exactly what they were up to. They tell you.
So this idea of controlling language and being able to use terms, manufacture terms out of nowhere, and then to represent. It's interesting that you say, you know, that that one trans person thinks that they could then speak for everyone. But what I'm seeing on the left that's scary to me is not just that it's almost this idea that because I am a member of an oppressed group, which of course, as you've said so brilliantly so many times, we're all a member of an oppressed group. It just depends on how we classify ourselves, right? We can find something about, every single one of us can find something upon which, under this sort of rubric, we are an oppressed group. But that the idea that... Go ahead, please. The idea that someone could... that someone can claim that they are oppressed, but not just speak for that oppressed group. What I'm seeing is they're speaking for all the oppressed group, that all of a sudden, I'm a black woman, so now I can speak for trans people, I can speak for immigrants, I can speak for... But yet, even their own self-interests are so, like, they're so divergent. And yet they're being lumped into one... Is that part of the postmodernist sort of ethic?
Well, no, I would say that's actually one of the weaknesses, the fundamental weaknesses of the postmodern ethic. So imagine, so Derrida's fundamental claim is something like this, said every value system excludes. Okay, so imagine if you have a value system, it means one thing is privileged among other things, by definition, right? If you want to walk across the street, it has to be an assumption of your value system that getting across the street is better than being where you are. Right. That's why the chicken crossed the road, by the way. Yeah, because the chicken thought that the other side of the road was better.
Right.
Right. So you cannot act without a value structure. Okay, now, so having said that, then you might say, well, what value structure should you adopt to guide yourself? Well, that's obviously a problem. And the problem is pointed out by the postmodernists. They say, look, as soon as there is a value system, then some people are excluded by it. And then and that's fine. That's a perfectly valid claim. There's absolutely no doubt. The value hierarchy of beauty excludes unattractive people. It puts them at the bottom.
Sure.
The value hierarchy of intelligence puts less intelligent people at the bottom. Physical fitness, health, like you name it, it excludes. All right, so then the postmodernists go a little farther and they say, well, the purpose of the hierarchy is to exclude. Now,
that doesn't make sense.
That's sleight of hand, eh? Because, so they say the purpose of the value hierarchy is to exclude, and then that the value hierarchy invents its own language and terminology and perceptual mechanisms to view the world through that justify the hierarchy.
That's backwards. That's backwards, yeah?
Well, again, there's some truth in it. You have to give the devil his due. So you might say, well, economically powerful people favor laws that favor their economic power. Well, it's sort of true. Some economically powerful people favor some laws that further their economic power, right? You have to put the boundaries around it, but the postmodernists don't do that. They're not noticed for nuance. And they throw out the idea of competence completely. So, for example, if you want to have brain surgery, you're probably going to wish for the existence of a value structure that privileges the most skillful brain surgeon.
Yes.
And you might define that as probability of you emerging from the surgery cured and alive.
Right.
Okay. All right, so we'll go, sorry, I have to answer this.
No, please, this is, fascinating.
Now, so you've got your value hierarchy, right? It privileges some things and puts other things at the bottom. Then the postmodernists say, well, the purpose of the value hierarchy is to put people at the bottom and some people at the top. Now there's where the Marxism is hidden, because the Marxists, of course, believed that the world was a battleground between the privileged bourgeoisie and the oppressed proletariat. And of course, there's an element of truth in that, again. But the problem with the hypothesis is twofold. One is, yes, value structures exclude, but without them, there's no meaning in life. Because a huge part of the meaning in life is to strive towards the better. And so without a value structure, there's no positive, there's nothing positive in life, technically, because we know that people experience positive emotion in relationship to a valued goal. So in fact, if you take cocaine or something like that, the reason that you enjoy it is because it activates the system that makes you feel like you're pursuing a valid goal. So you knock out the value systems, no one's excluded, but there's no value left. But the postmodernists don't care about that. And then another problem with postmodernism is there isn't just one hierarchy, right? If you're not good at soccer, you can go play basketball. And if you're not good at basketball, you can go play chess, or you can paint, or like there's dozens of value hierarchies. Now, the Marxists would object, yes, they're all united by money, but that's nonsense. There's lots of value hierarchies that aren't predicated on money. It's a foolish claim. There's all sorts of things. I mean, you don't want to be starving to death, obviously, but there's all sorts of things that you can pursue outside the purely monetary domain. So there are many games, not just one. You need games because otherwise there's nothing to play. And then the next thing is, okay, fine. So let's say you assume a monolithic value system. You call that the patriarchy.
Right.
And then you assume, well, the patriarchy excludes. And then you visibly assume that all the people the patriarchy excludes, because it's monolithic, are the same people. Well, obviously they're not, and that's why. So what happens is the category of excluded starts to fragment and fragment and fragment and fragment. And that's the weakness of the leftist collectivist thinking. And that's why the LGBT acronym keeps growing.
Right.
Well, it can't help it, is because, see, they're trying to produce a category of exclusion. There's no such category. And it will be devoured by its own internal contradictions, which is why you start to see the feminists, for example, are starting to fight with trans activists.
Yes.
And the gay men are starting to become, because they're increasingly status quo, they're starting to be excluded from the excluded dialogue.
Well, yeah, it seems gay white male is no longer seems to no longer be a protected class in the mind of the collectivist left.
Right. Well, but the fragmentation is absolutely inevitable. Now, my proposition in part is that we've already been through this. What the West learned thousands of years ago is that you should fragment the group all the way down to the individual.
Right.
And the reason for that is, of course, people are oppressed. Jesus, wake up, obviously. Obviously, the culture has a tyrannical element. Now, that's not all it has, but it has a tyrannical element. And everything about you, Vin, that isn't ideal is excluded from consideration.
Sure.
You could be more attractive. You could be taller. You could be stronger. You could be smarter. You could be richer. You could be nicer to people, etc. You're like, every individual is unworthy according to the value structures that structure our interactions. Well, so that's fine. So then you let individuals move forward through the world laden with their inadequacies and treat them all as if they're each their own category. That's the fundamental proposition that the West is predicated upon.
So what when you say that the postmodernists want to tear down the foundation, what I understand though is that the foundation of, and I mean, as you have brilliantly illustrated, the foundation of I guess Western culture is just the evolution of a long process going back, even millions of years of sort of refining this cooperative, hierarchical sort of striving and putting it into a place where millions of people can live together in relative peace.
Peace. Yes, they live together and cooperate and compete without breaking down into murderous violence.
But is that what they're after? Are the postmodernists truly after, or do they realize that? I mean, is this a sort of conscious thing? Where does it lie in their conscious? Is it subconscious? Is it a desire from deep inside of them to see everything just go to hell, basically?
That's a really good question. I mean, this is a question for psychoanalytic thinkers. You know, Dante, when he wrote the Inferno, was interested in the structure of hell. And you don't have to think about that metaphysically. You can think about it as a psychological investigation into the realm of darkness. And anybody who knows anything about themselves understands the idea of a realm of darkness. I mean, that's where you go when you're jealous and enraged and resentful and bitter. And what Dante was trying to do was to understand what was at the bottom of that. Well, I think what's at the bottom of it, he thought betrayal was at the bottom of hell. The betrayers occupy the lowest position in hell, the one closest to the ruler of hell, so to speak. And that's pretty good, because betrayal is really bad. You know, because what you do when you betray someone is you violate their trust. And trust is the fundamental currency that unites human beings in peace. So betrayal's bad, but resentment and arrogance are pretty bad too. And if you're resentful enough, which is easy to be, because, you know, we already said you're oppressed by your culture. You're not doing as well at any number of things than you might be. And that can easily lead you to be resentful and bitter. And if you get resentful enough and bitter enough, you're hoping that everything around you goes to hell. Like, look, and I'm going to tell you the story of Cain and Abel, which I return to quite often. It's a very short story, biblical story, right? It's the second story in Genesis. So you might say it's the first story about human beings who actually live in history, because Adam and Eve are made by God, so to speak, and so they're not real human beings. But Cain and Abel are the first two human beings. And obviously I'm thinking about this as it's a meta story. It's like fiction on steroids. You know what I mean? You might say, well, is it true? It's like, no, it's more than true. It's distilled truth. So Cain and Abel are brothers, and Abel is a good guy, and everyone loves him, and he gets everything he wants. And, you know, he has wives, and he has camels, and he has flocks, and he has everything. And worse than that, everybody knows he deserves it. And he's a shepherd, a keeper of flocks, and Cain is a farmer, and Cain and Abel make sacrifices to God. And modern people don't really understand that, but that's because they're not thinking very hard. Everybody makes sacrifices. Anybody with any sense, you know, you forego gratification in the present to make a deal with the future.
Right.
And the deal is that I'll give this up now and work hard and concentrate, and I'll delay gratification so that the future is better. So you can think about it as a bargain that human beings strike with the nature of reality. And it's a major human discovery that you can sacrifice. No other animal knows that. You know, like if a bear comes across a tree trunk full of honey, it doesn't think I should store some of this for next week.
Right.
It thinks I'm going to eat as much of this honey as I possibly can right now.
Right.
Only human beings. It says in Genesis that human beings are cursed to work because they're self-conscious. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. We know the future's coming, so we make sacrifices. Okay, so people had to act out that idea before they figured it out. And so the way they acted it out was to dramatize it. But it isn't that they knew the idea and were dramatizing it. It was that the dramatic expression of the idea was its first form, like children pretending to understand something.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can you just back up on that really quick? Sorry. Our studio's right next to these guys going crazy next door, but they're loading something in their truck. Can you go back over that, because I think that it's something where I've in the sort of debates that you've had with atheists, where this is the thing that I think that they don't get. And I perhaps would not have understood it, I think, had I not had Joseph Campbell and then Alan Watts and a sort of understanding of a better understanding of Jungian archetypes. Can you explain this? Because I think that a lot of people, when they think about religion, and I know a lot of our viewers are atheists, I don't think that they understand this concept. I think that it is this idea that, oh, these things come out as these fully formed sort of narrative stories. But you suggest something that's very, very different, and I had not heard it suggested this way.
I can give you an example from little kids. So and then I'll return to the Cain and Abel story.
Yes, please.
So we won't lose our track. But
please.
So imagine two little kids playing house, and one says, well, I'll be the mom. And then that kid adopts the style of the mother and does mother things. And you might think, well, that's imitation. The child is imitating the mother, but that's not right. Like, imitation is when someone goes like this and the other person goes like this. It's like, it has to be one-to-one matching. What the child is doing is something way more sophisticated. What they're doing is observing the mother in multiple contexts, extracting out what you might describe as the spirit of the mother, which would be the thing that makes mother across multiple contexts, and then embodying that, acting it out. It's amazing that children can do that. So you could say, well, the child is starting to embody the archetype of the mother, and that's what the child is learning to do when they're pretending. Because the mother is a sequence of actions and perceptions fundamentally, and the child observes the mother and then tries those actions on and perceptions on for size, using their body as a representational platform. Now, you do the same thing when you go to a movie. Like, you watch the hero, and you run the hero as a simulation on your body, and then you can read off your own emotions, what the hero is experiencing, and you can participate in the movie. So people are very good at this. Now, okay, so now imagine that you have 100,000 mothers, and you're trying over time to understand what it is to be the perfect mother. And so you take what's admirable about mother number 1 and what's admirable about mother number 2 and what's admirable about mother number 3, and you make a meta mother out of that. That's Mary.
Right.
Mary met a mother. And here's an example of this. It's so cool. So one of the very common medieval representations of Mary was as a young woman holding her infant up to the left and stepping on a snake with her right foot. Now you think, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means Mary, it means a bunch of things. It means Mary protects her child from Satan. That's one of the things it means. So that from the spirit of evil. Well, okay, look, you don't have to be too much of a genius to figure out what that means. It means that a good mother keeps her child away from evil.
Right.
But there's a biological underpinning to it too that's very deep, which is a good mother keeps her infant away from predatory reptiles. And mothers have been doing that for, I would say, for at least 60 million years.
Right.
These are old stories, unbelievably old, and they're built right into us. We know that human beings are prepared for snake fear, for example, if they're not actually just biologically afraid of snakes. There's still some debate about that. But we have modules for the detection of predators that lurk beyond and within. And so and then you can say, well, we also devised a representation of the meta-father. Well, that's God, roughly speaking. And God is look, we can be very concrete about this. We don't have to think about it in religious terms at all, although I happen to think that's a mistake. But we don't have to go there. That's fine. So imagine that you make a sacrifice. So you're working today and you're going to get paid.
Right.
All right. So that payment is a recognition of your sacrifice. And the question is, who is paying you? They're promising you something. Well, spirit of the culture is promising you that you can redeem your stored sacrifice later. And so you could think about God the Father in some sense as the imaginative projection of the promises of mankind distributed out into the future. And so when you make a sacrifice to the Great Father, to God, you're dramatizing the idea that there's a future being who is a judge of yours, with whom you can have a relationship. It's so brilliant. It's so brilliant. And people had to act that out before they could. Look, we're just starting to understand it in an articulated way now.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You know, people don't understand what Cain and Abel means, the story, even though it's about sacrifice. It's so funny because I teach my students about this story, and I say, well, Cain makes sacrifices to God. Did your parents make sacrifices to send you to university? Well, they instantly know what that means.
Yes.
Well, so it's the same word.
Right.
Right. Okay. So anyways, back to Cain and Abel.
Okay.
So Abel's making sacrifices, and there's some intimation in the story that Abel's sacrifices are high quality. And there's some intimation that Cain's sacrifices are low quality. He's trying to pull one over on God. Now, it's very ambiguous, and I think that's purposeful because, you know, sometimes you see people who seem to be doing everything right, but they keep getting slapped by fate, you know, in a really unfair way.
Yes.
So God in the Old Testament is kind of an ambivalent character. Just because you make a bargain with him doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that it's going to go well. He's God, after all. He can do whatever the hell he wants. And so you can get cut off at the knees. But the story intimates that Abel or that Cain is playing a crooked game. Anyways, he's working like mad, breaking himself in half, trying to get his vegetables going, which is no joke. And nothing's going well for him, so he's getting all bitter and resentful and feeling downtrodden and victimized. So we'll keep it in mind. Whereas Abel, man, it's the sun is shining wherever he goes, and everyone loves him. And worse, Cain knows that he deserves it. So that you know how embittering that is. It's like when the guy that beats you is a son of a bitch. It's like no problem, you know. Yeah,
right.
He's it all, but he's such a horrible person. It's like that's nothing. The real horrible person is the person who's beating you that deserves it.
Right.
That's the guy to hate, man. So anyways, so Cain has had enough of this, and he's getting pretty arrogant and resentful, so he thinks he'll go have a chat with God, the creator of reality. So he's angry at reality, or even more deeply, he's angry at the substructure of reality. And like anybody with any sense can understand what that means. When when a loved person has cancer,
right,
then you'll experience anger at the substructure of being. It's like, come on, we know what that means.
For sure.
So anyways, he goes and has a chat with God, and he basically says something like, you know, what kind of stupid universe did you make? Here I am out there in the field, breaking myself in half, trying to make things work. Nothing's going my way. And then there's that Abel character, and no matter what he does, the sun shines on him. It's like, how is this even reasonable? What kind of crazy God would make a world like this? Well, read the Columbine kids' descriptions of what they did, and you see if they thought the same way. Anyways, so God listens, and then he has something to say to Cain, and this is really where the story gets intense. He tells Cain, basically, that sin crouches at his door, the door of his house, like a predatory and amorously aroused cat, a predator, and that Cain has invited that cat in to dine on him and mate with him.
Interesting.
And so what does that mean? Well, there's echoes of the vampire story there, right? You have to invite a vampire in.
Right.
Right. So what God tells Cain is, look, you've done a lot of things wrong. That's the sin part. Sin means, by the way, to miss the middle of the target with an arrow. That's what it means. It's derived from the word hamartia, which is an archery term. So it means to miss the mark. Okay, so God says to Cain, look, you've made a lot of mistakes. Worse, you know you've made them. Worse, you invited in the spirit of evil into your house, consciously and voluntarily. You let it have its way with you. You created something horrible as a consequence, like you gave birth to something horrible as a consequence, and that's why your life is going downhill. So get out of here and don't be criticizing reality. A horrible thing to say, right? Everything is going wrong is your fault, and you're just whining about it. And so Cain leaves, and he is not happy camper after that conversation. And he thinks, okay, fine, I'm going to go kill Abel. That'll show him. That'll show Abel. That'll show God. That'll show me. Because Abel is also Cain's ideal, right?
Right.
It's like he's killing his own ideal. He's killing what he wants to be, but he doesn't care. That's all the better for revenge against being and God. So he goes out and kills Abel. That's what human beings are like.
That seems to be this idea of killing God. So that's definitely the nihilist idea. But it's you saying that really, and then the connection with Marx. It seems as though and I've experienced this. I mean, I have a sociologist professor of University of Chicago as one of my siblings, so I see it even there that it seems to be the people who are most interested in seeing this destruction happen seem to come from or seem to be of the group that is striving. How can I say this? For instance, Marx was not a member of the proletariat, but yet he was very interested in destroying what was essentially his own class.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's a good question. I thought about this a lot. So it's like, well, how can Yale students say that they're oppressed?
Right.
Right, because let's just think about it for a minute. First of all, they're American. Mm-hmm. And for better or worse, you know that black Americans are the 18th richest nation on the planet?
That makes sense to me.
Right,
Sure.
Well, right, exactly. Of course it does. So, if you're an American, you're already in the top, let's say, 0.1% of all the people who've ever lived.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you're an American at Yale.
Right.
So you're not, you could say, well, I'm not a member of the controlling class, let's say, yet. But it's like, yes, you are. You're just a baby one.
Right.
Right. I mean, you're on your way, man. You're on
Right.
your way. All you have to do is get your degree, and the probability that you'll be in the top 1% in a relatively short period of time is, as long as you continue on the same path, you're headed there.
Right.
Okay, so look. So let's say, what's better than being at the top 0.1%? What do you not have when you're at the top 0.1%?
An excuse? An excuse for why things don't go perfectly, I guess?
No, you don't get all the delights of being a victim.
Right. Right, yeah.
If you're really greedy, this is what you want. You want all the delights of being in the top 0.1%, and you want all the privileges that accrue to being a victim and a martyr. Right, and that's so...
Wow.
Talk about greed, man.
Where does that come from psychologically? Where does that? I mean, that seems like a real sickness and a real illness of the soul there.
Yes. Well, I think part of it comes from shame.
How do you mean?
Well, maybe if privileged people did what they should with their privilege, let's say, or let's put it a different way, let's say maybe if people who had resources and ability did what they should with the resources and their ability, they wouldn't feel guilty about having them. It's when they're squandering it, they feel guilty and ashamed, and then they have to justify that somehow. It's like, I've met lots of people in my life who had access to plenty of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them were doing everything they could to make things better around them as fast as they could.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't feeling that guilty about their wealth, because, well, they weren't squandering it. They were devoting it. I mean, look at what Bill Gates is doing.
Sure.
Jeez, the guy's trying to wipe out malaria. It's like, go Bill. And he's doing a credible job, and maybe he's going to put the boots to polio, and it's great that he has all that money. I'm glad I don't have all that money. Who would want that much money?
I agree.
That much responsibility? He's got like $60 billion. That's completely insane.
Mm.
So I think I think that you cannot overestimate how pathological resentment and arrogance can become. And it can drag everything down into the deepest pit imaginable. And some of it, Vin, is also ignorance. It's like people, because they're so badly educated, they have no idea what true horror looks like. They take everything for granted. They don't understand what it would. I saw this image a couple of weeks ago. It was a horrible, searing image. And when I say the image was horrible, I mean it, because I've seen lots of things that were horrible. It was peasants selling human body parts at a market stall in Russia in the 20s.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Just imagine now what you want to do is imagine doing that. Imagine it. Imagine what you have to do that.
It's painful to imagine it. It's painful. It's a painful process to even imagine it.
It is horrible to imagine it. It's I don't think that you want to go there.
No.
But if you don't go there, you don't know how lucky you are.
And is that, do you think that is something that we're seeing, is that people are asking for something? I keep hearing this: shut it down, tear it down, all of this, which they're talking about the fundamentals of this civilization that we have, to basically tear it down, shut it down, but without any idea of what will come when you shut it down.
Oh, that utopia, the promised utopia will come. That's hey, I figured out something this morning that I've been working on for quite a long period of time. So after Cain and Abel, the story, the flood comes, so that's something to think about. But then the other thing that happens is the Tower of Babel. And so what happens is that people decide they're going to make a tower that'll reach all the way to heaven and usurp God. But what happens is that as the tower gets higher and higher, the people who are building it start to speak different languages.
Right.
God makes that happen, eh? But I thought, oh, I see what that is that as you build a totalitarian structure that's higher and higher and includes more and more people, what happens is it starts to fragment inside, because those people don't have any uniformity of purpose. So you can't build the thing to compete with God. It can't become total, because inside it fractures. That's exactly what's happening on the left. It has to happen. It's inevitable when you build a structure that monolithic that it fragments.
I've heard you. It's funny because the more and more I talk to people who have also discovered you and I looked at your work, the term prophet keeps coming up over and over and over again. But I find it interesting, and there's a lecture where you talk about the archetype of the prophet and how the prophet comes when the state is old and corrupt and blind, willfully blind.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. That's an archetype.
It does seem that is the place. You've also helped me with my understanding of what the state exactly is on a more sort of psychological and spiritual level. But it seems that we are at that point. It seems, I think, pretty self-evident as people look around that everything in terms of the state is falling apart, that we are maybe at that Tower of Babel place. Can you help us to understand what, if it's inevitable that this is going to crumble, is it also inevitable that it crumbles into totalitarianism, or is the totalitarianism first? Are we going to, basically, I guess what I'm asking is, in your opinion, in your understanding of history, in your view of where we're at psychologically, are we about to, and is it necessary that we have to go through an even more structurally totalitarian situation before this is fixed?
That's a good question. It's you think, well, what does it take people to learn? And you'd think maybe the 20th century was a lesson, but we didn't. It isn't obvious that we learned from it what we needed to learn. And if you know what they say, those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. And so chaos and totalitarianism are always the likely outcomes. It's the active attending and careful speaking of people who are alive in the present and who are shouldering the responsibility that keeps the state from deteriorating. And so this is partly why I'm trying to talk to individuals and say, look, the way out of this is to get your act together, wake up, open your eyes, orient yourself towards the good, or at least away from suffering, away from unnecessary suffering. You could make that your mantra. Life has no meaning. Well, here's the meaning. Horrible pain. Worked hard to eliminate it. And there's no brooking that. Well, life is meaningless. It's like, yeah, you say that to some child who's suffering from brain cancer. In a million years, who's going to know the difference? Your nihilism is useless in the face of suffering. So abandon it. If you want an orientation for your life, work on alleviating suffering. And that'll orient you towards the good. You could say, well, the good is whatever leads us farthest away from unnecessary suffering. And you use the truth as a tool in that pursuit. Orient yourself towards the good. It's like Geppetto wishing on the star. It's the same idea. Look as high up as you can look. It can be you're up. Whatever you think is your value, the highest value, you know, if it's really yours, pursue that and orient yourself towards the truth. And that's how societies stay away from chaos and totalitarianism. That's it. Or at least that's the Western creed. That's the Western idea. But it's predicated on these, you know, you can't lay that at the feet of Christianity. You can't lay it at the feet of Judaism. It's much older than that. You know, the Egyptians had a god, Horus, who was the sun god, at least in part. He was the god of illumination, and he was a falcon. And the reason he was a falcon is because falcons can fly up above everything and see. He was like Zazu in The Lion King, the king's eyes. And so falcons can really see. They can even see better than us. And he was also the son of the decayed state. He was the son of Osiris, and it was Osiris's ability to pay attention that enabled him to fight off the evil that threatened the state, that overthrew the state. But the Egyptians had figured this out in their mythology, you know, thousands of years ago, that the state was Osiris, the dead king, threatened always by his evil brother. Well, that's universal. The state's always corrupt. How do you fight against it? Open your eyes to the corruption and fight with it. And that's at every level. And you start with fighting with it in yourself. That's where you start, because if you don't constrain it within yourself to at least some degree, everything you do in the world is going to be like an unholy mix of good and bad intentions.
How do you this orienting yourself toward the truth, I think, is very powerful, and I think that you've given some great frameworks through it in your own work, through the material of understanding truth. I mean, for the people who are watching this, who maybe lean to the social justice warrior side, which I myself did as a young man, certainly. I mean, and I think that it's something that young people, before they've actually gone through and had some life experience, will tend to orient as though and think that that is the good, because I'm helping people by doing this. But yet there are some internal contradictions, obviously. How do we orient ourselves towards the truth? How do we understand truth when we're confronted with these things that may on the surface appear to be the good? How do we drill down into what is truly good?
Well, I'm going to speak practically to begin with. I mean, I think that to tell people to tell the truth it's a bit misleading in some sense, because of course you don't know what the truth is. But the way to deal with that is to stop lying. And that's different. Like, let's say you don't know everything, and so what do you know about the truth? It's fair enough, that's a reasonable critique. But you'll see, if you watch, that much of what you do and say is untrue by your own standards. And you tell partly because when you utter the false words, you will feel weak and embarrassed and ashamed. You know, you go to a party and try to impress people, and they all laugh at you when you leave, and you go home feeling like an idiot. And why do you go home feeling like an idiot? Because you are one.
Right.
You've perjured yourself. You've betrayed yourself. And you know it. And people, don't get me wrong. I know that people can become too self-critical. I understand that there's dangers in every direction. But it's very frequently the case that people don't use their own words, and they're weak. You can hardly listen to them. The noise they make is like a buzzing.
Yes.
I really experience that when I'm listening to people who are possessed by an ideology. I just can hardly stand listening to them. It's just it's like random clattering on garbage can lids or something like that. It's horrible. you can tell when someone isn't speaking to you from the foundation of their own experience because you can predict everything they're going to say.
It's very true. Very true.
Solzhenitsyn wrote a lot about that in the Gulag Archipelago because he used to talk about like staunch communists who were devoured by the concentration camp system. So they would be really staunch communists, real supporters of the system. And they got thrown in prison anyways. And him and his friends used to play games with them until they broke down. Not making them break down. That isn't what I mean. But they called the game comrades. And what they would do was continually ask them questions about the failings of the communist system, including the fact that they had just been thrown in prison. All the newly imprisoned communist sympathizers could do was mouth Marxist platitudes. And eventually they would stop doing that. And then it was at that point that the other prisoners, at least some of them, might actually have a conversation with them. But until they started speaking like damaged and fragile human beings instead of totalitarian commissars, there was no communicating with them.
I read the first volume of the Gulag Archipelago off of your recommendation in, I believe it was one of the very early videos when you had just started with sort of the gender pronoun wars, as it were. I don't know when I will start Volume 2. Volume 1 was a lot for me emotionally.
Volume 2 is the real killer.
So what struck me and what I think bothered me the most was the mundanity with which he described the horrors and sort of the mundane nature in which, as he talks about the history of these laws and the show trials and the things building on top of one another. And it made me think, and it definitely made me understand, there were many people who I spoke to about the things, about your protest, as it were, of what was going on at University of Toronto. And for so many people, they could not understand, why doesn't this guy just chill out? Like, that's what so many of them said. And what came to my mind was this idea that, were you to not have spoken out as an individual, and you saying, not lying. And I think that as I spoke with my sibling, who is an academic, who is a professor, who is not a tenured professor, but who is a professor and well respected, he was like, I know that there are things wrong. I know that there are things that I think are wrong that are happening, directly addressing this, but I'm not going to speak up about it. I'm not going to, with whatever justification. I guess, and I don't know if this is a question, but just something that I would hope that you could comment on is that what you're talking about in terms of not lying? And also, if people lie, is it necessarily that, because I think had you not spoken up about this, it would have just mundanely gone along and eventually just been a part, and then it would have exploded at some other time, but by that time it's already too late. I mean, is that the willful blindness as well? Is that
okay, so let's go to the first part of your story, because that's a good one. So you see this very commonly among academics. So they basically say, well, when they hit assistant professor level, although they may have already done this to some degree in graduate school, they don't say what they really think or believe because they think it'll compromise their career. Mm-hmm. What they think is, well, once I get into a position of authority, then I'll be able to say what I think. So I'll just keep my head down for now. And so then they become an assistant professor and they say, well, now I have to wait for tenure. And then they become an associate professor and they say, well, I need to wait till I'm a full professor because then I'm really protected. But what happens is, well, if you practice shutting up for 20 years, then all you know how to do is shut up. It's like you're not the same person after practicing willful blindness for 15 years. You think you're going to come out of that entire apprenticeship and disciplinary process with all your clear-headed honesty intact. It's like, no, you're going to sell it one piece at a time until there's nothing left. And then by the time you become a tenured professor, you'll find that although you're more protected than any other human being on the planet has ever been from everything, you no longer have enough courage to say anything. And that's what's happened. I mean, I've got such minimal support from academics. I really literally got thousands of letters since this all started back in September. I get about 40 a day or something like that. And I could count the number of letters I've got from people in academic positions on the fingers of one hand, I think, probably 5. And I've heard through the grapevine, so to speak, that many of my colleagues agree with what I'm saying, but, they think something like, well, you could be nicer about it, and which is quite interesting because I think, it's such a funny response because they think, well, it's something like, well, if I was speaking up like you did, which I could and would, I would also have been warmer and more gentle about it.
Yeah, that's a pretty ridiculous. So then that should be a call to action. Then it's like, well, then do it, right? Well, then speak up with the tone that I should have. Please let me be the crazy one in the room, because right now I'm the only one in the room.
That's exactly right, man. If you think you can do a better job, like go for it. And I'm not saying you couldn't. Believe me, I'm not saying you couldn't. Maybe, I don't do things perfectly by any stretch of the imagination. And, I have my fears and all of that, and I probably use anger, I suppose, to some degree to overcome them, because anger is actually a very good emotion for overcoming fear. And I wouldn't say I'm someone who's particularly fond of conflict. I mean, I'll engage in it only because I know what the alternative is. So, but, by temperament, I'm actually I'm an agreeable person, much to my, detriment, I would say.
I'd say hardly. Thankfully you are, because you're spreading this message through so many interviews. What I want to ask you about is this. I do consider myself definitely a hardcore individualist, and I think your message and certainly the material that you present is very much about, if you want to improve the world, if you want to improve the state, or that the only way to improve the state, almost, if I understand it right, is to go within and fix yourself. I think this is a very difficult concept for people to understand. If you could maybe help us to understand why changing yourself will necessarily change the outside, because I think most people do not think that way.
Well, okay, so I'm going to switch that a little bit, because I don't think that it depends on what you mean by yourself. So, and I don't know if that simplifies the situation or makes it more complicated. Well, but things call out to you for improvement if you look. So, for example, if you happen to be sitting in your bedroom at home, maybe you're a university student, and you look around and, there's a pile of unwashed clothes in a corner, and there's some dust under the bed, and there's a stack of books that you haven't opened sitting on the desk. And you're in the room and you're looking around, and you look at those things, is that they'll fill you with a sense of unease. You won't want to look at them. And the reason you won't want to look at them is because those places are portals through which chaos might flow. Okay, so it's shaped like a book. And when you look at it with your eyes, you see a book. But when you look at it with your soul, you see the goblin. And so those little goblins are around everywhere. Everywhere. All you have to do is look. And some of them are small enough so that you could fix them. And that's the trick, is to look around for what you could fix. And it can be by your own definition. It's like you're somewhere, something isn't right as far as you're concerned, that you could fix. Fix it. You know already what you're doing wrong. And you don't have to look to anyone else to tell you. You can just start by fixing those things that you know that you're doing wrong. That's the behavioral equivalent of ceasing to lie. Anybody can sit on the bed in the morning and go, okay, I know there's a couple of things that I should do today, that I could do, that I would do, that would make the world better around me for tomorrow morning. And they're small things, but they're not small, because as you get good at doing them, the things that you can do get bigger. And so you might ask, there's this great line, great scene in a T.S. Eliot play called The Cocktail Hour. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. This woman who's quite troubled goes and talks to a psychiatrist at the party, and the first thing she says to the psychiatrist is, "Doctor, you know, I really hope there's something wrong with me." And the psychiatrist looks at her and says, "Well, what do you mean you hope that there's something wrong with you?" And she said, "Well, I'm really unhappy in my life, and things don't look very good to me, and so I've got this terrible situation where either I'm doing something wrong or the whole of reality is not a good place." Yeah, and so, okay, so there's a lesson to be learned from that, and it's something like, well, if what you see is unbearable, perhaps there's something about how you're interacting with the world that could use some refinement. And say, well, and you have to ask this as a question. It's like, okay, what could I do? I'm in a terrible place. Is there something I could do to make it better? And the answer to that is almost always yes. And it'd be something you don't want to do. It'll be some little thing that you think is beneath you, that's annoying, that you've been ignoring precisely because it doesn't sit well with you.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I've done probably about a dozen ayahuasca ceremonies. I would say that I've had those 3 teachers, and the fourth one has been a plant. And what's funny is I actually had the woman who was the organizer of those ceremonies actually on as a guest, and she basically spent our entire interview talking about Carl Jung and the shadow and how this was a plant that took you into your shadow. But it's interesting you saying that, because I've had some profound experiences where I've been in other cosmic worlds with sacred geometry, but one of the most interesting experiences I had was a 2-night ceremony where basically the only thing that I got over and over and over again was go get a file cabinet and file all and get your office in order. And that's what I was getting from, and what was crazy was,
it's pretty good that the gods took out time their busy schedule to tell you to get your filing cabinet in order.
Well, what was crazy was that when it brings that to mind, that I was like, okay, had it just come to me, I probably wouldn't have done it. But since it was in a ceremony and I knew, I was like, okay, this is profound. When I did that, so many things in my life just seemed to, the energy in my house changed, everything. My mood changed, everything. So what I'm wondering is, these sort of goblins, these goblins of chaos, or I mean, are those the snakes of chaos at that point?
Sure.
These little, so is it the willful blindness then of the individual person being willfully blind to these snakes of chaos in their own life, that then as we all get together, that essentially it becomes a snake pit then? And is that the message then? Is that what we are seeing as the state, what we are seeing as these issues of resentment, of people wanting to burn it down, is because they're seeing this snake pit that we've created ourselves, and they want to escape the snake so badly, but they don't know that they have to first work on the snakes in their own life.
Maybe even they just want they want the snakes to eat everyone, including them. I mean, the kids who go and shoot up high schools, these mass murderer types, that's what they've decided. It's like, to hell with it. We'll take out as many innocent people as we can, just to spite the creator of the universe, and then we'll blow off our own heads just to show that it doesn't mean anything. And so it's refusal to take responsibility. I mean, this great historian of religions, Mircea Eliade, he looked at the flood story, which is well distributed worldwide, and he said the flood story has 2 common motifs. And there's a flood, and that just means that things fall apart. It's like, obviously things fall apart. The dam breaks. Well, why does the dam break? Well, number 1, because things fall apart of their own accord. That's just entropy. And number two, because people speed along the process by their willful blindness and their sins. And so that's what happened in New Orleans.
Huh.
Everyone knew it. And all the money that had been dumped into New Orleans to fix the problem had just lined people's pockets. And so, you know, the Dutch built their dikes so that they'll withstand a storm of a magnitude that's only encountered once every 10,000 years. And the Army Corps of Engineers knew that the dikes and the levees in New Orleans would only stand a century's worst storm. So that's not good enough. And so, you know, you could say, well, it was an act of God, the flood, because it was a flood. Well, yeah, okay. Was it the hurricane or lack of preparation? It was lack of preparation, pure and simple. The hurricane was just the excuse, so to speak. And so you could blame God or you could blame sin. Think about it that way.
So when you're saying we blaming sin, I mean, is that us blaming ourselves or
Yes.
our blindness?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that's really interesting about the Old Testament, which is a very remarkable book, is that the Jews get walloped by God on a pretty regular basis. Like the whole Old Testament is the Jews sort of struggling up to something resembling power and then just getting corrupt and then just getting flattened. And then they're like half dead. You know, you ever see that Bugs Bunny cartoon where the big stone brick kept falling on the vampire bat?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's like that. It's like, whap! Then they struggle up again, and, you know, they put themselves together, and then they get kind of proud and blind, and a prophet comes along and says, you better be careful, and they're not, and so God just wallops them. And it's like, it just happens, I think it happens 5 times. Well, the Jews always get up on their feet and say, oh, we screwed up. Better sort ourselves out, better put ourselves back together. They never say, we were victims of an oppressive reality.
So that's interesting. It is the taking responsibility for even making that one single improvement in your own life, and that there isn't oppression then in that way. I mean,
well, that's the thing, is who's oppressing who? That's the ultimate question to some degree. I mean, there's this idea in Christianity that Christ took the sins of the world onto himself, right?
Yeah.
That's like Atlas lifting up the world. So to do that, which I would say is a Christian duty in some sense, now to wander into the domain of, I'll just call it mythology for the time being.
Okay.
It's like, why is the world screwed up? Well, because you're not good enough. That's why. Sort yourself out. Because just think about it practically. You know, people probably waste, I ask my students all the time how many hours a day they waste. And certainly it's 7 hours a day.
Sure.
Yeah, just complete waste by their own criteria. I don't define what waste means. I just ask them. It's like, how much time do you waste? It's like, well, 8 hours a day, 6 hours. Okay, fine. 60 hours a week, let's say, or let's say 50. We'll give you a break. 200 hours a month, 6,000 hours a year. All right. At $20 an hour, if that's what your time's worth, you're squandering $1 million in 10 years.
Right.
That's what you've distributed to the wind. Then you say, well, my life doesn't have any meaning. Well, yeah. No wonder. You're wasting 8 hours a day in sleep. Well, pick something.
I don't know if you can hear that slamming in the background.
It's the thunder in the background.
It's been one of those days here. But at the same time, I mean, how accurate are we in terms of when we, or is that always going to be accurate? I mean, is how much time we're wasting, is that really ultimately all up to us? I mean, I think so, because people define it for themselves. Like, I don't say, how much time do you spend
playing video games. It's like, if you don't think that's a waste, hey, no problem. Play away, man. Maybe you're learning something.
And so, okay, so this is interesting. So then it really is cleaning up those goblins, cleaning up those snakes of chaos until you don't see them in your life anymore. That there's not some external objective measure, but you'll know it when you.
And you said yourself, you told me the story. You had this ayahuasca experience, so it's a transcendental experience. And you got this little mundane message out of it. It's like, get your filing cabinet in order. Well, that's a microcosm, that filing cabinet. You said you fixed up your filing cabinet and the entire emotional tone in your house changed.
Yes. Right.
Absolutely. Dead on. Exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, because the filing cabinet is, it's order set against chaos. That's what it is. Like, it's one of the advantages to looking at things from an archetypal perspective is that you start to see things that your senses blind you to. It really is the case that reality is made out of order and chaos. It's really the case. And you can tell that wherever you go. You can see chaos if you look. You can see it wherever you go. You can see habitable order wherever you go. I mean, when you're walking down the street and there's a schizophrenic alcoholic who's badly broken walking towards you, muttering and yelling out in the air, you're going to go around that person. Why? Because he's a cyclone of chaos, and you're not going to go near him. You're going to give him a wide berth because you see that as soon as you won't even look at him. You won't even look at him most of the time, because to make eye contact is an invitation. And often people like that, if they're really far gone, if you actually look at them, they get very angry.
Sure.
Yeah, because they can see what they're like reflected in your eyes. They don't like that. They don't like that at all. And so you'll walk around them. You see chaos all the time.
So we cannot construct, and maybe that brings us full circle, is that we're certainly seeing groups of people on all sides of the political spectrum trying to construct an order out of the things far external of them, trying to change aspects of the world that actually in many ways have absolutely nothing to do with them. I think this gender pronoun thing it's perhaps a great example of that. We probably will not meet. I mean, you're more likely at being a professor, but I'm probably quite unlikely on a daily basis to meet somebody who wants me to call them by pronouns other than the male and female gender. But yet there are people who don't even fit into that, who are fighting for that. And amongst all these other sort of collectivist ideas, trying to change the world, trying to create an order in this very external way, when the order internally for them is quite clearly, even when you talk to them and speak to them and you see them acting out, is completely gone. Like they are just completely in chaos. So I mean, I guess that's full circle. I don't know if that's a question, but if I have that right, I mean, is that the message? Is that the message? Like, go internal and get the chaos, fight the snakes that are roaming around in your own home, in your own soul, before you even attempt to fight any others.
That's that's the idea that Western civilization has been struggling to develop for forever. You know, since we formulated the idea of the snake in the Garden of Eden, and God only knows how long ago that story emerged. It's certainly tens of thousands of years, and I suspect in its more primordial forms, it's far, far, far older than that. It's like, well, there's snakes, you have to deal with them. Well, what sort of snakes are there? Well, there's real snakes, and then you might call them meta snakes, and a meta snake is your desire to do harm. It's someone else's desire to do harm. It's someone else's desire to torture. It's your desire to torture. It's your desire to burn everything down. It's your desire to hurt the people you love. That's a real snake. And it's a meta snake, right? It's if you think about a predatory reptile as the fundamental enemy of our earliest tree-dwelling ancestors. Well, we got smarter than that over time, and we started to understand that the most dangerous thing wasn't a snake. It was maybe a nest of snakes. It was where the snakes came from. And then we started to understand that snakes live in people's hearts. And then we started to understand that snakes live in our own hearts. Yeah, well, that's the emergent idea of evil, right? It's where exactly is the worst of all possible snakes, and it's not the one that's crawling around in your garden, I can tell you that. It's obvious. And with regards to getting your act together, it's just, you know, we're doing pretty remarkably in many ways as a species. I mean, we'll lift about 250,000 people out of poverty today, out of absolute poverty, and hook about 300,000 people to the power grid. You just imagine what the world would be like if people stopped making it worse.
Right.
Just that. They wouldn't even have to work hard to make it better. I mean, that would be almost unimaginable. But if they just stopped making it worse, you know, I always think there's this great Tom Waits reading of a Bukowski poem called Nirvana. I love it. It's about this kid who's on a bus and he's really lost, and they go up in a hill and stop at this restaurant, and he goes in there and everything is good inside the restaurant. The people who are serving get along and they're laughing with each other and they make an excellent cup of coffee. It's just a diner, you know, it's nothing fancy. But the tables are well scrubbed and the food is clean and properly prepared and everyone's grateful to be there. And he has this little fantasy that he could just stay there and no one else notices. And then he goes back on the bus and continues on his trip. But it's good to think, here's the opposite of that. And everyone has been to a place like this. So imagine a diner, okay? Walk in and you put your hand on a table and it's sticky.
Yeah.
And you know what that means? It means to get sticky like that means it hasn't been properly wiped for 1,000 times.
Right.
It's got that kind of varnishy stickiness on it, right? And then the waitress comes over, but a little later, or maybe a lot later than she should have, and she looks none too happy to be there, and she isn't that polite. And then she brings you a cup of coffee, and the cup is chipped, and it's dirty, and the coffee is bad, and the cream is sour. And when you mention that, you get a bad look. You know, and you go downstairs maybe to use the washroom, and like every step along the way is a descent into grime and misery. And you come back up and you order your breakfast, right? And the egg is overdone on the bottom and underdone on the top.
Right.
And then you get your toast and it was burnt, so they scraped it, and then they put cold butter on it just in the middle and pour a whole right? The orange juice is only orange in color, not in taste. Right, and the bacon tastes like pig.
Terrible.
And so you think, okay, what is that place? Is that a diner, or is it a place designed to make everyone who comes in there a worse human being? And that's what it is. And that's a good example of the difference between doing things and doing right and doing them wrong. You can go into a diner and it can be a good place. You know, they serve you a decent cup of coffee, you get a good breakfast. And the place is run by someone who actually cares that little corner of the universe is operating properly. And you come out of there a better person than you did when you went in.
I love it. Wow, so much in this interview. Thank you so much for being here. Show's about to come to its end. I would advise everybody to go and check out your lectures for sure on YouTube. Also, go to selfauthoring.com. That's something that I'm planning on doing myself, working through that workshop. Was there something, anything else that you felt you might want to add to the conversation before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I have one thing, I guess. I would say this goes back to the truth. Here's a way to live. Articulate the truth as carefully as you can, always, and see what happens. Yeah, that's the thing. That's what would you call it? That's the embodiment of faith. The idea is that the truth is what will make the world better. And so you tell the truth, and no matter what happens, you assume that that's better.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for this, and thank you for your work. And I can't wait to see what's next. I know that this will have influenced a lot of people just checking this out. So, Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
All right. Well, we'll see you later. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, Christian, that was something else.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to go back through that interview and
There's
re-listen to it. It's
a lot of good stuff.
It's dense. Well, you know what, man? It makes me feel vindicated, and it makes me feel good that we're on the right path, because I think since show number 1, the one thing that I have strived to do, and I know you have strived to do, is no matter what we do, is to tell the truth as we know it, and as he said, to not lie to ourselves.
Yep.
Really good, man. I think that there's a lot there, going internal. If we want to change the world, it's about, people ask me, it's funny, and I've been getting these sorts of messages as people have checked out the show, and they've said, besides educating myself, what can I do to make things better? And I think, no. It's educating yourself, and then once you're educated, it's acting upon that in your own life.
Yeah.
And that's going to make things better. There isn't something more. That is it.
Yep.
Because the alternative, you're going to make things a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, dude, I want to thank you for today.
Thank you.
We almost got through without a crash, but we'll figure that whole thing. So anyway, I'll say goodbye to the people. Wow, what a great show. I'm blown away. That was my truth is that was the interview that I had wanted to have for quite a while, and there's so much there. I hope that you enjoyed it just as much, and there's a lot to digest. We'll be back next week. Actually, next week I'll be in Acapulco. A Christian will be hosting the show. I may call in on a Skype. We're still getting that figured out. But next week, check us back here Monday, 10 a.m. You can watch this archive on youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also, youtube.com/activistpost has a lot of the best of sections of the show. You can listen to this podcast if you want to download it on iTunes and Stitcher. We will see you again next week, and until then, stay free.